Good morning, everyone. I'm very pleased to be introducing our speaker today, Chris Clark. And for those of you who don't know him very well, you can recognize him because he's often carrying around a camera, because Chris is both an avid and an excellent photographer. Um, so Chris has been with our community for about 21 years, been a member. And during that time, he has done a long list of volunteer activities, but one of them currently is he's serving as on our stewardship team. And I'm pretty sure when we get back into the sanctuary, Chris Clark will be up in the sound and video booth helping us with technical issues there. So today, Chris will speak for about 20 minutes. And anytime during that time, you can write questions on chat. And that's a button usually at the bottom of your screen in the middle. And you can write any of your questions that you have for Chris. Please be sure that what you write is in the form of a question, not just a comment. And try to keep it short and concise, because it's hard for us to get in very many questions. After Chris concludes, we'll open it up to question answer then, and then I will read questions and Chris will answer for as many as we have time for. So we'll turn things over to you now, Chris.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to keep mine in, hello all. I'm going to keep mine in gallery view so that I can look like I'm talking to people. So just so everyone is familiar with that. The topic of my credo is change, and with that, tolerance. So tolerance and change. And I'm going to focus on three areas that I feel right now are important to me. First, a little bit of history, and it goes into the first one of race. And I want to give some background, first of all, and that is in the 1960s, late 1960s, the family moved to the Chicago area, just west, a town called Wheaton. This was during the time of the Democratic National Convention. It was during the time of Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination. It was during the time that George Wallace was running for the Democratic nomination for president. So it was kind of an interesting time. I was a third and fourth grader during that time, so have a different perspective than many adults do on that time. One of the things that does stand out that started my foundation, I guess is what I want to say, is during that time, Jane Elliott started her Blue Eye Project. And it was in that region of the country that it spread. And so by the time I got to fourth grade, we actually did a portion of that study in our classes. At the time, it didn't really make a lot of sense to me, but over time, I've learned to understand what it was, how it developed, and created a foundation for what I am. The initial, for those that are not familiar, the initial context of her study was that we should be looking at everyone as the eyes of colorblind, that we should not be looking at someone with their skin tone as their background, but that we should be colorblind to what they look like. And while it has a good foundation for young members of our society, as you get older, you start to realize there's an inherent flaw in that. And that's where I started building my change in race. The biggest change I saw was that by doing so, I did not recognize the history that was different to mine, the experiences that were different to mine. And it was only after I came to that realization that I was able to start looking more through the eyes of others to how the world is treating them and how society is treating them. So that's where I come from, my basis of race. And it's how I look at everything today as well. I understand that processes such as redlining that came into society, or the Jim Crow laws that even today are subtly hidden within other laws, how they impact how the world works and how we come through the world. It makes me understand the term white privilege much more, because there are certain things that I can never experience or never will experience. I can observe them, but I cannot actually experience them as the firsthand person. And that's where I started developing my change towards race. I understand we're going through a lot of workshops and programs and things at our church that build upon what that is and how the white privilege works in our society. I don't attend a lot of those because, to me personally, I feel like that is stepping back. I've gone through a lot of this already in my life. And so I feel like I'm ready to go to the next level, or working on the next phase of how do I change and how do I adapt myself to what is going on. So that's why I don't attend a lot of the ones that go on in church. I understand that there are people that are still trying to understand it. I do get that, and I do see that. So what I'm trying to say here is that we all change at different ways. We all learn at different ways. We also all have different tolerances of how we accept things in different phases of our lives and in different stages of our progression. So my tolerance on this aspect as well is to understand that there are people that have gone through more aspects of it than I have, and there are those that have not gone through as much. So I have to be understanding and not get upset, not get mad when I feel like someone is doing the wrong thing. I have to become tolerant of their process. I have to become tolerant of their evolution, I guess is the best way to say it. I don't have a lot of this segment taught into racism, but I just wanted to give that foundation, because the other two aspects that I do deal with also have the same similar foundation. And the other two aspects I want to discuss, the next one is politics. And here we are in a state of very volatile politics in this country. I find it very, very challenging at times to have conversations with people that I've known a lifetime, as we all have. Politics has become very divisive in this country. And as such, we find that we all get very nervous, very intense when we see some things going on. Best way to say this is, if you think about it, up until a few weeks ago, it was impossible to turn on a TV station, turn on social media, get a conversation in public, or even someone in your own family without having the topic of politics come up. And eventually, within a very short period of time, tensions start to rise. People we've known our whole lives, we're finding that we really didn't know all about them that we thought we did. For the last 4 years, it seems to have come out more for people. To me, it's actually not been just 4 years. It's going back 30 or more years that I've been noticing it. Because I first started noticing the trends we've seen over the last couple of years back in the 80s, when I started watching what was going on in politics at that point in time. As a result, I've had to change a lot of my own personal political views. Many of you do not know this. I am a registered Republican. Yes, I'm a member of this church, but I'm a registered Republican, and I have been. It might seem kind of strange with today's world, but go back and think about where we were over the last 40 years. And it might not be as strange to many of you because, first of all, when you live in Ohio, you don't register your party affiliation. It's not something that you do. I didn't have to do that until I moved actually into North Carolina in 2000. I spent 5 years in South Carolina before I got to here. In 2000, you come in and they ask you to register your party on your voter registration. So I did. At the time, it was actually very easy to do because a couple of things were going on. First of all, if you remember, that's when Jesse Helms announced he was retiring. He was a longtime senator, very, very well known for his racist views, but he was going to be replaced, my hope was, by someone who I actually aligned with, and that was by Elizabeth Dole. I knew Elizabeth Dole from Red Cross because I spent 20 years volunteering for Red Cross and saw the change that she brought into the organization throughout the 90s. And I felt that would be something that I could support in her politics. I'll be honest with you, there were many times that I was challenged, even in our own church, about my political views. That's why for the last 20 years, I really haven't said much to anyone about it. In fact, to be honest with you, I think the only one that I can see on the screen right now that I've even mentioned before being a Republican, and he might not remember, was actually Jay, one of the first times I met him. That's the only one I know I can see on the screen that would have known that. I'm not saying I follow today's Republican philosophy that you see in the news, but then again, in today's Republican Party, what you hear is a vocal minority, what most of us consider. Most of the Republicans that I do know and I do align with do so because we are more centrist than we are far right. That's where I get into my tolerant view. And what I see, though, is, and I hear from both sides, I hear that those on the left say that the ones on the right are being stubborn, obstinate, not willing to listen. And I hear the same thing from those on the right, that the ones on the left are being stubborn, obstinate, not willing to listen. And here I am stuck in the middle. What we need to do is we need to have both sides willing to talk with and not past each other. Something that hasn't happened much in the news, the media, or social media for quite some time. Instead, it becomes a shouting match. Who can yell the loudest? And whoever yells the loudest thinks they're the winner. So you have to kind of step back and relax, be tolerant of their views, be willing to accept that you've changed. Hopefully they can as well. That's where I've gone with my political views. Maybe it sounds similar to what most of you feel. Maybe it doesn't. That's why we are all different. And to me, I don't have a problem with it. If you and I have different political views, that's fine. But let's talk about it. Let's not shout at each other. Right. The final area that I wanted to talk about my change, and it's not really as much of a change in the sense that people think or would originally expect, but it is a change in my attitude. And that's in the area of religion. As Carol introduced me early on, I was born into the Unitarian, actually, I was born technically into the Universalist church, not the Unitarian church. For those that are not familiar, there is a difference between the two bases of the religion. One is more theist than the other in general. But over the last 50 or 60 years, we've kind of put them all into one bucket. That's fine. There's plenty of room for all of us. The question is, are we willing to accept all of us? And that's where I'm finding the challenge of tolerance and the challenge of change. Right? My mom, she's always been active in the Akron church. As long as I know, she's been singing in the choir. Not as much recently. She's been involved in the board. She's been involved in the finance committees. Growing up, I was actually an assistant collector at our church as a teenager. The collector being my grandmother, so she was also involved in the church. I can't remember growing up in that church without having my mom and my grandmother there and at some event. So the Akron church grew up, it formed me. It gave me a foundation. I had a great minister there, just like I have two great ministers here. All right. I grew up, and Jay, you know this, I don't know if you did, Eve. I grew up under Gordon McKeeman. And I was a year or two behind Barbara Peskin. So knowing them and feeling with them, growing up and talking with them over the years, I reconnected with Barbara a couple of years back when she started coming back to the Akron church for Christmas Eves. And we had some good conversations at that time. And I enjoyed those conversations again. It's been quite a number of years before that I had talked with her. But those were the foundations. When I came to the Charlotte church, there was a 5-year gap between when I moved to the Carolinas before I actually joined the church, actually about 4 years, now that I think back, about a 4-year gap. There was a couple reasons for that, partly because when I first moved, everyone in the community that I associated with said that, oh, you don't want to go to the Unitarian church. They're way far right, or I'm sorry, way far left, radical, liberal fanatics. And you didn't want to have anything to do with them. That's not where I was in a religious view. So I decided, let's pause and find a little bit more out about them before I decided to go. Ironically, the one thing that happened that caused me to go is back in the 90s, some of you might remember, there were a series of fires at churches around the Charlotte area, mostly around the southeast area. It was said to be a group of teenage girls, and it was said that they were practicing or using Wiccan practices. And I remembered going through and reading the paper at the time, and I saw basically I saw a response or a letter to the editor in response to several criticizing the Wiccan practice, earth sciences, and even the Unitarians in that process, in that criticism of the church fires. I'm not 100% sure, but I want to say that it was Amy's response that I saw to that. And it made me stop and think, yeah, maybe I do want to go visit them. And so I did. It was like a week later. It was an Easter Sunday. I came in, I sat down, in the sanctuary. Actually, I arrived a little bit early, and I saw earlier the very first person I talked to. In fact, he's on the screen right now. The very first person I talked to when I walked in was Rich Green, and he was there with his daughter Emily, and we talked a little bit about it. And we had a good conversation. I went in and sat down to listen to the choir play, because that was, music is, my mom was in the choir. I was used to music. I like to listen to the choir rehearse. Sat down. I met another longtime member that unfortunately is no longer with us, Beryl Jean, and had a very good conversation with her. I talked to her every Sunday for the rest of the time I would get there early. I always made sure to talk to her because I made a connection with her. So I started building those connections that existed, from just getting to know people. And I realized that, okay, maybe I misjudged some of the people in this church, or just based upon not knowing them. And so I decided getting to know who this church was, who this community was, is what I wanted to do. What I still find troubling, and what I'm still working to adapt to change with, is another, maybe something that you might not realize is, yes, I was born and raised in the Unitarian Universalist tradition. I consider myself, by definition, an agnostic. I'm not atheist. I'm not theist. I don't know. That's what it is. That's what I feel most of us are. We have discussions about what it is. We have discussions, and I know that I've talked with people in our community who definitely define themselves as a theist. You don't hear about them very much, but I definitely know they exist because we do talk. I've known people in this community that definitely define themselves as atheist. That's fine. We do talk. Some of them are a little bit more like in the political structure that's more, both sides, more loud and vocal and basically condescending to the other side. And that's troubling to me. It's what I have to work on my tolerance with. I try my best, but I go back to something that I heard another member I see on the board here in front of me. I heard a sermon by one of our lay leaders back about 20 years ago, but Lloyd Dillon, who in his sermon, A Case of Agnosticism, and Lloyd, I don't remember your words exactly, but I'm going to try my best to paraphrase them. But basically what he said was that an absolute believer, either for or against a deity, is just as wrong as the other view. Having absolute faith there is, or absolute faith there is not, a God, is equally as wrong. We don't know. That's what I took from that. And it made me think more about how to adapt and how to change my views on what to accept it. I know I'm getting near the end of my time, so I'm going to just add one more quick little story of how we adapt to change. And it's in my own family. I have two younger brothers, just like me, born and raised in the Unitarian Universalist Church of Akron. Neither one of them are members of that church now. They go to their own church with their wives and families. One of them is Episcopalian. One of them is Roman Catholic. Both of them, I've gone to church services to their churches. When we have family gatherings, it's not unheard of to sit down and say the Lord's Prayer. I know the words. I say it right along with everyone else. Something we learned growing up is how to be respectful for other religions. So with that, I say I'm still working on change. That's one of the things that I'm using as my foundation for change. It's also working on my foundation for tolerance. I've kind of cut a lot of this short because I knew I had like 8 to 10 pages of things to go through, and I only had about 20 minutes to do it in. So I cut it down as much as I could. And I thank you for listening to me and hearing me out. And I look forward to any questions you might have.
Okay, thank you, Chris. We'll jump into some questions right now then. Let's see. Here's one. What do you see as the future of the Republican Party? Can Trumpists and centrists coexist?
In my view, long-term, no. There is an aspect of those on the far right, the Trump side of the equation, that will not accept anything except their own universe. And we can't exist in a small universe. We have to exist in the larger universe. So I ultimately see the Republican Party splitting into two different factions and forming two different parties. I believe that the core center-right Republican Party will become the larger and ultimately, over time, the dominant of the two. And eventually the far right will fade out just because they won't have the support, over the course of their life. That's really, that's my view.
Okay. Someone else, this one I am going to share, even though it's not exactly a question, but somebody else who's been through a lot of our programming on social justice says that she'd like to give a plug to that because it's beyond recognizing white privilege, and that she said it's a real deep dive into opportunities and that can be helpful to any of us. So anyhow, she was just endorsing that. Somebody else has said, after January 6th, I decided not to engage with anyone who does not fact check. Any advice for me?
Typically, it's a challenge. And what I find is I've had many people, when I present them evidence to the contrary, they tell me that I'm believing the lie. And you can't just sit back and say, all right, I'm the only one, that I need to do the research for myself, that they did the research. Well, in reality, they didn't do all of the research. They just listened to something that they wanted to grab a hold of. So you can't you can't argue the position strictly by yourself. You're going to need to have support across social media, news media, society in general. You're going to have that support. And over a course of time, what I'm finding is, some of the far extremists in my social media platform that I kept, and I never dropped anyone during the election cycle, although I wanted to many times. Some of them that I kept in watching with, and I would go out and I'd see a change over time, especially as the events that were based around the QAnon, as they came not to be true, more and more of them started realizing that, hey, they weren't believing the truth. They were believing false narratives. And as such, that's what I keep helping to educate them and let them know where the false narratives are, but they ultimately have to learn on their own what to believe and what not to believe. A lot of it comes down to, I would suggest anyone that has not studied history of Germany in pre-World War II, take some time, go back, and especially look at some of the philosophies that Goebbels followed at that time, because he was the minister of propaganda for Nazi Germany. And a lot of the things that he put into place is exactly what the QAnon theory and the far right and everything else is using today. So start learning that and what we used in society to try to counter that.
Okay, we have one other question. It's not really a short answer, but I'm going to have to ask you to give a 1 or 2 minute answer. How have you noticed that Unitarian Universalism is changing over the course of your life?
I saw that one pop up on my screen. So what I've seen mostly, and it's been a gradual trend, to me, it's kind of troubling. And what I've seen most of all is that over the course of the last 60 years now, 50 of which I've been at least 50 or slightly over that I've been at least consciously aware of, the shifting of not of the overall denomination, but the shifting of the dominance of a segment of the denomination that is trying to drown out the rest. And I'm talking more of a political religious standpoint of the politics within the UUA, how people that are of the theist side of the, of our program are being drowned out more and more. And that's what I find most troubling. We've had it happen in our congregation. We've had it happen. I've seen it happen in the Akron church, which I still attend regularly. Other churches that I have visited, I've seen it happen. And it's a troubling view for me. We had it to a standpoint back when we were in early 2000, is the question came up, could we have a minister in our pulpit that used the word God? And today I hear it even more. I hear more people saying that we should not be doing that. To be honest with you, I was troubled by the renaming of our community. To me, it is a church. That's what it is. I don't have the Christian definition of church in my heritage, so I could never look at it as the Catholic Church. We are a Unitarian Universalist church. That is a big difference to me. So yes, I am very troubled, and I didn't vote to have it changed, but that's what the majority wanted, so I went with it. Those are some of the changes that I see.
Okay, Chris, I wish we could go on longer, and everybody else probably has a lot more things you'd like to ask and talk about. Thank you so much for sharing yourself with us today, and your positive and views on UUism, and some of your critiques of it as well, and your sharing about the changes that you've dealt with and that you believe we as a denomination are dealing with too. So we appreciate it very much, and thank you.
Very welcome. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So we hope to see many of you on the fourth Sunday in March, and for another Credo. Thank you.